So guys, I want to talk about Gary Lineker, his recent tweet, and the migrant crisis that Britain faces. So I'm going to break this down as simply as I can, because I know that a lot of the viewers of my channel are not from the UK. So I'm going to try and break this down. But in a nutshell, there has been some recent controversy over the weekend over a tweet of a ex-footballer who hosts a football show, a very popular football show that is usually on Saturdays, a very popular football show that is held on Saturdays in the UK. So I'm going to try and break this down as simply as I can, starting really from the beginning. So we have a Conservative Party, and they are in power at the moment. So we have a Conservative government in power. Now, migration to this country, and this country being the United Kingdom, is such a big issue, and it has been an issue for a very, very, very long time. So what the government is faced with is trying to stop asylum seekers from arriving in small boats crossing the English Channel. And the English Channel is the space between the coast of France and the British coast. So what's happening is that small boats are crossing from France and coming and arriving on the English shore. The majority of the people that are crossing are claiming asylum. And it's obviously a very dangerous route. Some people have died crossing that route. They come from various places and they come to our shores. And then the majority of them, I believe it's 90%, seek asylum. We used to have a very similar, so obviously the migrant issue has been a big issue for a long time. And when I mean an issue, I mean controlling the numbers of people that arrive in our country illegally and then claim asylum. And also ones who just sort of arrive illegally and just disappear in our country and remain staying here illegally. So it's about controlling that and controlling the numbers. So controlling legal migration as well as illegal migration. So there used to be an issue with lorries, so big vans that used to arrive with stock. And they would obviously travel through Europe. They would then travel through France, and they would get on board the boats, and the lorries, the vans would then arrive on the British coast. And what we found was that, and what you would find is that people were hiding in these vans. They were paying to get a place onto the vans and being smuggled into the UK illegally. And then some of them would arrive in the UK and claim asylum, and some of them, of course, go missing. So the UK government tried to tackle that crisis, so people arriving on lorries. And I believe that the UK essentially paid for extra security and extra monitoring, extra sort of X-rays at the French border, and implemented other measures, and it eventually kind of dealt with that matter. And I don't really hear about many people arriving in the UK in that way. But what we now have is that people are arriving on small boats. I personally think it's unfair that, in order to deal with the lorry crisis, that the people arriving on the back of vans, is that we had to sort of pay for more security and more monitoring, more X-rays on the French border. I think that's actually quite unfair, because I think that there should be more implemented by France to control their borders. But I guess, in my opinion, they don't really have an incentive, do they? Because the migrants are leaving their shores and coming to the UK. So why do they have an incentive to control their borders, I suppose? Now also Rishi Sunak, who is our Prime Minister, he has made a deal with the French Prime Minister, and again, pumping in money on the shores of France. So I guess France don't really have an incentive unless it's monetary, I suppose. But, I find that really, really unfair, but there we are. So people do ask the question that, if you are a real asylum seeker or true asylum seeker, you are having to pass through other countries in Europe that are safe in order to get to the UK. And then, of course, you take that very dangerous journey across the shores, and risk your life. And people have died taking that journey. So people have questioned, why wouldn't you stay in other countries in Europe that are safe? So why would you pass through France? Why would you pass through Italy? Why would you pass through Greece? Why would you pass through, other countries surrounding? Why would you pass through other countries in Europe? So people have asked that question, and I wonder whether it is because of the attraction of our welfare state to our welfare system. So whether that's an attraction for people who want to settle in this country, or whether indeed, we have some sort of reputation, perhaps, that we're a little bit more softer in the approach that we have to our to people that are claiming asylum or wanting to regulate their immigration status, and that allegedly we're a lot more softer, and the majority of the asylum applications are granted. So I don't know whether those are factors. But then, of course, you do have people claiming asylum, like, for example, from Afghanistan, who have assisted the British government, like the Afghani translators. So obviously we have a duty and responsibility there, and we should obviously help them. And obviously we are a signatory to the Refugee Convention, so we do have a duty, both legally and ethically, to help refugees and asylum, and try to help as much as we can. So a lot of people believe that the immigration system that we have in the UK is a broken one. There are severe delays in processing applications. There's a fear among people that there's a lot of illegal immigration. And some people worry that the amount of, or at least they're being told that there is such a large amount of people claiming asylum on our coasts, and that also there are a lot of illegal migrants. So that's what people are being told through various avenues of the media. So it is causing a lot of people to be quite upset about this. And there is a lot of pressure on the government to do something. In recent years, there has been an increase in people crossing the English Channel in small boats. So some figures show that before 2020, the numbers of migrants that were crossing were in the low hundreds. And then in 2022, it rose to 45,755. So a massive increase. And so, of course, that was reported in the media, and it just made a lot of people and a lot of members of the public very, very concerned. And obviously, as I've already mentioned, it is a very extremely dangerous way to get to the UK, and people have died. It has been reported that 90% of the people that then arrived on the shores have claimed asylum. And the Refugee Council estimates that over 2/3 of those who have claimed asylum, over 2/3 of those who have claimed asylum are likely to get their application granted. So they're likely to be successful in their application. So the question is, why are they arriving on our shores claiming asylum? I mean, you obviously have the obvious ones, the Ukrainians, the Afghanis, the Syrians. You have the ones where it's quite clear. So you have these migrants where it's quite clear why they're coming here and why they're claiming asylum. But then you have other migrants from other countries where you have to question, why are they here? Why are they here in such high numbers? Particularly where some people view their country of origin as a safe one. And I give the example of Albania, and it's been reported that about 10,000 young Albanian men arrived on the shores of England in small boats, and now Albania has been declared by our Prime Minister as a safe country, and indeed they want to join the European Union. It's also been reported that there are some people, some of these migrants are getting rid of their passports and getting rid of their phones in the sea. There's reports that the fear is that a lot of these people that are arriving on the shore are, and I'm not claiming that it's the majority, okay? I'm just claiming that there is a lot of people that are arriving on the shore are economic migrants rather than actual refugees. Migrants just trying to seek a better life, to come to this country to work, to earn money, cash in hand, and they have paid people to help them be smuggled into this country and pay people thousands of pounds to arrive here, or thousands of dollars to be able to help them arrive here. And there is some fear that people are turning up on our shores on these small boats, either claiming asylum or disappearing because they've actually been brought into this country, being trafficked into this country by criminal gangs. So people are concerned about the migrant crisis, right? So on one hand, you have genuine refugees. We are signatory to the Refugee Convention. We have an obligation to help people who are seeking refuge in this country. Totally fine. There are some people that are worried about the numbers. It's well known that we accept less refugees than other countries in Europe. The bigger concern, I would say, is the illegal immigration. So people abusing the refugee pathway and arriving on the shores, wanting to enter this country illegally, so just disappearing, or indeed playing the system or claiming asylum when in fact they're coming from a safe place. And indeed, they've passed through so many countries on the way to get here that are safe. And they didn't stop and claim asylum in any one of those other countries that they've passed through. So these are thoughts. This is not my personal opinion, but these are thoughts that a lot of people have had. And so this is where we have now got to, where I want to talk about Gary Lineker and the BBC. So Suella Braverman, who's this lady here, she is our Home Secretary, okay? She has put forward a bill through Parliament. So it's not a law, it's a proposal for a law that's called the Illegal Migration Bill. And what she and the Conservative government are trying to tackle is deterring people from arriving on this country by these boats. So they are trying to get this bill passed, which prevents people from claiming asylum if they have arrived in the UK in those small boats on the coast. So just for a little bit of context, as you can see, Suella Braverman is a woman of colour. I believe she is of Indian descent. She is also married to a Jewish man, and that will be relevant in a moment. There's an article here about the illegal migration bill, and it sets out, you can see here a graph of the people arriving. You can see 2018, 2022, that's a massive, massive increase. So the new legislation here seeks to deter people from coming into the UK via these boats, and then it sets out these the ways in which the legislation is seeking to achieve that goal. So at the moment, it's going through Parliament. So Parliament's obviously our government. It's going through Parliament at the moment. So it's going to be scrutinised and so forth. And then there are various other paths that it has to go through before it can be made legal if it is passed as law. There is a lot of talk that this bill is not going to be approved, and that in many ways it is just a political move by the Conservative Party, so that if it doesn't go through, they can at least hold their hands up and say, well, look what we tried to do, look what we tried to pass. There's a lot of people that don't think that it's a legal bill because it takes away a lot of rights of people. So if you think about it, if you take away the boat crisis and you've taken away the lorry crisis, how else does a refugee arrive in this country? So let's say an Afghani translator who has assisted the British government, how do they get to this country in order to claim asylum? You know, they can't just get on a plane and fly over and arrive at Heathrow Airport. So how does that happen? How do people from countries where they can't get visas to get onto an airplane, they want to claim asylum? How do they do that? There isn't a legal route at the moment. So this is why a lot of people find this bill quite controversial. And people are saying, that it is just not compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights, and that in some ways we are breaching our treaty to the Refugee Convention. So now I will bring you on to Gary Lineker. So Gary Lineker is this gentleman here. He works for the BBC, and the BBC, as you will know, is a British broadcasting channel. It is a national channel, which means that the public pay for this channel. So the public have to pay a TV license every single month, and that TV license pays for the running of this channel. Other channels we do not, but the BBC we do. And so if we do not pay our TV license, we could be criminally prosecuted and could be sent to prison. Okay. And so what is expected is that the BBC, being a national broadcaster, is that it is impartial in the way that it broadcasts, because it's obviously a national channel and it's not a politically one-sided channel. It's supposed to represent all of Britain and the opinions of everyone, and so forth and so forth. So Gary Lineker, for those of you who don't know, he used to play for Leicester City as a striker. So he was a famous footballer. He is 62 years old. He's had a long career in football, and after he retired from football, he's had a long career in football broadcasting and football entertainment. So he hosts football shows. He's a football commentator, and he does various other things in the UK, like he advertises crisps, and some of you might call them chips. And he does various other things. He's basically a TV personality. He's very familiar among the British people. So he has a very, 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 very high profile. He hosts a football program called Match of the Day, which is on Saturdays. Match of the Day is like a highlight program which highlights the football matches that have gone on. And he brings on other footballers and other ex-footballers, and they all talk about football and the match and the players and so forth. And it's a very, very, very popular program. So he has 8.6 million Twitter followers. So after the illegal immigration bill was reported in the news, he tweeted, "This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used in Germany in the 30s. And I'm out of order." So, yeah. So his tweet has caused a lot of controversy in the news. And you might be surprised, actually, as to how controversial it was. And I should say that he has taken in a refugee into his home and offered the refugee a home. So I don't know whether that has brought into his feelings as to why he wanted to put that tweet out. He essentially then stepped back from presenting Match of the Day. And so he announced that he was stepping back until he was able to reach an agreement with the BBC over the use of his social media. Okay. So Suella Braverman, whose husband is Jewish, it was reported that she found his comment offensive. But I should say that previously she has referred to the migrant crisis on our shores as an invasion. And she, at that time, was criticised by an 83-year-old Holocaust survivor who said that it was also similar to the language that was used by the Nazis. So Suella Braverman appeared on Good Morning Britain a few days ago, and she was asked about Gary Lineker's comments, and this is what she said.
30s. I'm very disappointed by Gary Lineker's comments, and I think equating our measures, which are lawful, necessary and fundamentally compassionate, to...
She says it's lawful, but actually it's not clear that it is.
1930s Germany is irresponsible, and I disagree with that characterisation. I'm delivering measures because they are on... We're on...
Okay, so I think she's right not to answer his question as to whether or not Gary Lineker should be fired or removed from his position. I don't think a politician should answer those types of questions. I don't think she has the right to determine whether or not he should be fired. And she does go on to say, well, that's a matter for the BBC. I think that's the right answer. A lot of Jewish people have spoken out against his tweet. A lot of people have spoken out not only against his tweet and what he said, but the fact that he got involved in politics, bearing in mind he works for the BBC, and the BBC is an impartial broadcaster, or supposed to be an impartial broadcaster. You know, he's sort of known to be a little bit wokey and a little bit kind of left-wing. And so he came out with this tweet that people found highly offensive. He stepped back from hosting Match of the Day. However, there was a lot of support and solidarity for him. There was a lot of solidarity amongst other famous ex-footballers who refused to appear on Match of the Day, or people that refused to host Match of the Day because he had stepped down. And so Match of the Day was played the Saturday just gone, and there wasn't a host. And then there were a lot of people coming out in the media in support of him and his right to free speech. So I just want to run through some of the arguments that people have said in support of him. So people have said, well, he has freedom of speech. He's speaking out against a government policy that a lot of people have said they find illegal, and therefore he's standing up to this government. So you can imagine a lot of people that are more left-wing, a lot of people support him, saying, well, he's right to speak out against what's going on, because obviously they don't agree with what's going on. So those who don't agree with what's going on, a lot of them are supporting him. Not everyone, but a lot of them are. So they're saying, good for him. Someone needs to speak out. He's got a huge platform. Great. And some people say, well, he spoke out in his personal Twitter. He didn't speak out in the BBC. Like, he wasn't on air hosting a show for the BBC. It was his own personal Twitter account. And some people are saying, well, has he breached his contract with the BBC? Has he breached his contract to remain impartial? Well, he doesn't work for the BBC. He's a freelancer. So, is that the same thing? Do the rules apply to him? What is in his contract? And people have said, well, he's not a political broadcaster. He's a football commentator. So, people aren't going to take his political views seriously. He's a football commentator. If he's a football commentator and not a news broadcaster or a political broadcaster, then do the rules then apply? Does he need to be impartial, or does the BBC guidelines or contractual terms, do they only apply to people who are political commentators? And then people say, well, he's tweeted before about political issues. Why is this any different? And also that there is a question as to whether or not the BBC is in fact impartial, politically impartial, because there's been some controversy over the chairman and any involvement he has had in improving an £800,000 loan for the ex-Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who is the head, or was the head of the Conservative Party, and some concerns that he funds or sends funds to the Conservative Party. And also that when Gary Lineker was hosting the World Cup for the BBC, that he had mentioned some of the controversy around the migrant workers in Qatar and how they were being treated. And some say that he was told to do that by the BBC. And then I just want to go through some of the arguments that people have said against him. So first of all, they say, well, he's very righteous, but he's a hypocrite, that he spoke in Qatar about the migrant crisis, about the worker crisis, sorry, but he happily went over to Qatar to host the World Cup, and that historically he has done some dealings with a company that has links with Qatar, and he was paid, I believe, millions allegedly. Some people have said, well, yes, he has done these political tweets before, but they haven't been as bad as this one, because the migrant crisis is such a controversial and heated topic and such a current topic. And there have been talks before between him and the BBC historically when he has made these previous tweets, and this is kind of the nail in the coffin. Some have said, well, okay, he may be a freelancer, but he is the face of the BBC. He's the highest paid person at the BBC. He's paid approximately £1.3 million a year. Obviously, that money comes from the public, and the public pay for the channel, so therefore the channel should be impartial. And he is the face of the BBC, and he has an ethical and moral obligation to ensure that his tweets are in line with the responsibility he has being the face of the BBC, and the fact that people, don't differentiate him between his show Match of the Day and him as an individual. It would be like saying, for example, oh, well, a member of the royal family, that's their job, but in their own time, they can have their own social media account and post whatever they want to about politics. That's not the case. They're supposed to be impartial, and they're not supposed to be political because they represent all subjects in society, not just one political party. He didn't apologise for his tweet, so therefore it's put the BBC in a very difficult position. So they've had to suspend him or get him to step back, whatever. People have said, well, when he did his tweet, did he think about the inner workings of the BBC? He has such privilege. He is obviously very wealthy, that he is not affected by the migrant crisis like the average person on the street. So he can stand on his little box and preach about the bill, and yet he also doesn't offer any alternative solution. And then some people are saying, you're referencing 1930s Germany to talk about our current government. That is highly inappropriate. And then some say, if it was the other way around and he had tweeted in support of the government, A, would he have so much solidarity? And B, would he have been suspended or not? So, it kind of, people are saying things from all different sides, if you get my drift. So what are my thoughts? So my thoughts are that this issue with Gary Lineker and his tweet brings up a lot of issues. And funnily enough, I don't think it brings up an issue of freedom of speech. I don't think this is even about freedom of speech, because people are not saying that he shouldn't be saying whatever he wants to say, right? What people are saying is that, well, this man has a responsibility to the BBC. He has or has not got contractual obligations, and he is supposed to be remaining impartial. And so I think this issue with Gary Lineker and his tweets brings up 3 points. The first is, what is the role of the BBC? And should we continue paying this license fee? Is the BBC truly impartial? Does he truly represent the BBC? 2, what are we going to do about this migrant crisis? Right? What are we going to do about it? What is the solution? What is the right, fair, legal solution? Because a lot of people are concerned about this, because the migrants are turning up. There has been some news about criminal offences that are being committed, for example, sexual offences, by very, very, very few, very limited numbers of these migrants, that they are needing to be housed in hotels and other temporary accommodation. And in this country, allegedly, we're spending 7 million a day housing these migrants. When people in this country are on strike, right? We've got NHS workers in our hospitals, our nurses on strike. We've got teachers on strike. We've got people that work in transport, the trains, on strike, because they're desperate for more money, because they're not being paid enough. They work incredibly hard, and the cost of living crisis is crippling so many families, and they're asking for a pay increase, and the government is saying we don't have the money. We have the elderly that can't afford heating. We have people that can't afford to feed their families, and they're relying on food banks and food vouchers. There is a crisis in every facet of our society. Homelessness. I can't walk around my town without seeing a homeless person on the street, or a homeless person approaching me for some money. And then yet people are hearing that we're spending £7 million housing migrants. So people are concerned, and they are worried about this. They are worried about the huge waiting lists for operations, or waiting lists to see their doctor. They are concerned about the huge waiting lists for social housing. And so people are saying, well, why isn't Gary Lineker talking about all these other issues? I don't believe in cancel culture. I don't believe he needed to step down. I don't believe that there needs to be some disciplinary. I don't believe that there needs to be suspension. I do believe there needs to be a conversation. I do believe there needs to be some clarity about his role, about his contract, about his obligations. I do think there needs to be some conversation and some clarity. I do wonder whether he would have had so much support and solidarity if he had in fact supported the government. I believe that people are supporting their friend. I believe that people are supporting the fact that he shouldn't be suspended. That's what I believe and hope, because I want to hope that people are not supporting his actual words. And it's sad that he's not saying sorry or apologizing for his words. You know, it's not the fact that he is against the government policy, so be it, but it's against his words. You know, you cannot compare anything to Nazi Germany, to the Holocaust, to Hitler. And I find that when people do that, I find that it's because they can't really properly articulate what it is that they want to say. They just go straight for the jugular. And frankly, he's talking about the use of language. Well, he needs to be careful with the language that he uses. He has a huge platform, and using that type of language can also incite division and also incite hate. And it also can incite hysteria where people are like, oh my God, you know, I've had conversations about this with people and they've gone, yes, the government is fascist. Yes, the government is racist. And I'm like, this is quite strong terms. And you run the risk of fueling and inciting people's feelings, particularly at a time when temperatures are so high over such a controversial issue. You cannot compare anything to Nazi Germany. Hitler was a monster. People suffered, and they suffered loss and death and torture and trauma. And to have it compared to the current government, who is trying to find a solution to illegal immigration or the numbers of migration, is really unfair. And I think, you know, is insulting, hugely insulting to those who have suffered through Nazi Germany. Our current government, and particularly the illegal migration bill, is not comparable in any way to 1930s Germany, to even the language that was being used, right? Their intention and their language and their hate, the vitriol for particular groups of people, for particular races, and wanting to eliminate these people, causing death and torture and genocide. You can't compare that to a government that is trying to do what it can to put forward a solution to a migrant crisis for the benefit of the people that are already in this country. But don't get me wrong, I don't agree with the illegal migration bill. I want to make that clear. I think there needs to be a very safe route for refugees to be able to claim asylum in this country. And I want to see clarity on that. And I do also believe that the responsibility in the language that we use also applies to the government and government ministers.
And so, funnily enough, I had been reading this in the press over the weekend, and funnily enough, as I was sitting down and recording this video, the news popped up that Gary Lineker is now reinstated to Match of the Day. He's been reinstated in the BBC, and the BBC chairman has come out with an apology. But Gary Lineker has tweeted, after several few days, I'm delighted that we have navigated our way through this, and I want to thank all the incredible support, particularly my colleagues at the BBC. And he goes on and on and on, and he says, and I'd also like to thank Tim Davie, who's the chairman of the BBC, for his understanding during this difficult period. And he has an almost impossible job keeping everybody happy, particularly in the area of impartiality. And I am delighted that we'll continue to fight the good fight together. So, yeah, Gary Lineker returns. So, yeah, this is an example of a sort of left-leaning person, wokey person, what some might say, defeating cancel culture. So good for you. Good for you. But I would like to see that sort of solidarity that Gary Lineker received, and also him not losing his job. I would like to see that reflected with all kinds of people who may say things that other people don't like. And so, as you can see here, Gary Lineker returns to the BBC, and the BBC announces a review of the social media guidance after the presenter was stood down after his comments. And there you have Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, apologising on Monday for the widespread disruption to sports programming over the weekend, and announced an independent review of the corporation's internal social media guidelines. And then he goes on to apologise here. So it seems the BBC has crumbled. So there we are. And I saw an article that Gary Lineker again. I just can't believe it's been about a week that he's been sort of on the front page of the news, which is quite interesting. So Gary Lineker challenges Elon Musk after Twitter user sends abusive message to son over the BBC row. So apparently his son, who is here, received some abuse on Twitter, which is obviously so unacceptable. So a Twitter user had described his son as a mug, which is a British term to describe someone that's like a fool, just like an idiot. So he says a mug who needed to be burned at the stake for defending his father. Well, that's pretty intense. Yeah, I mean, that's intense. I don't at all condone this type of language. He did not deserve a tweet like that. And unfortunately, that's the problem with social media. I think that's a problem that a lot of high profile and a lot of public figures experience, and in that social media is a different beast, and it does need to be controlled, and people do not deserve comments like that. You know, why do you want to express so much hate and vitriol? It's just it's not nice, and I guarantee it's something that that individual would never say to someone's face. So yes, so there does need to be a crackdown on this. So obviously Gary Lineker has called out Elon Musk, who is the largest shareholder of Twitter. The article says that he has challenged Twitter boss Elon Musk over a threatening message to his son in the wake of the recent BBC row. And so he has tweeted, "Is this acceptable?" at Twitter, at Elon Musk. I don't mean the grammar. And his son had tweeted earlier in the day, "Social media's mad, isn't it?" And then goes on to say that on Instagram he had loads of nice messages, and on Twitter he had so much abuse, and he said it's not even anything to do with me, which is true. It's not anything to do with him. He was just defending his father. And frankly, this whole argument over the BBC and over Gary's tweet does not warrant this type of behavior thing. But I do not agree that the whole argument around what he tweeted warranted any abuse to him or his family, because then it's just one big hypocrisy, is it not? Are we not then, he's attacking the government for their use of language, we're attacking him for his use of language, and then what, we're going to have the keyboard warriors out using their language to spread more vitriol and hate and division and abuse. It's just ridiculous. It just goes round and round and round and round, and it just blows up. And so I think the reaction is completely disproportionate, and we need to act in a way that we want others to speak. So I haven't yet picked up on Elon Musk's response, so I'd like to see if he does respond. He might be like, who the hell is Gary Lineker? So it's very interesting that this young fellow over here and his tweet has caused an uproar and has brought many, many issues to the forefront. So very interesting indeed. So guys, I'm going to end it there, and please do subscribe to my channel so that my channel can grow, and take care, guys. I hope you have a really good week. Bye, guys.